Daf Yomi, Tractate Bava, page 26a, at the top of the page, with the words Mide Kule Ka'amrinan. The Gemara asks, are we saying that based on the Kal V'chomer inference, they call it an a fortiori inference, one should have to pay the full cost of the damage, Nezek Shalem, caused in the public domain for eating and trampling? That would be false, as the verse indicating one's liability to pay the full cost of the damage limits the application to damage caused in the field of another. We are saying only that he should be liable for half the cost of the damage there, just as with regard to goring. Amar kra v'chatzu es kaspo shel zev lo kaspo shel acher. The Gemara rejects this as well. This is also incorrect, as the verse states, with regard to the payment of half the damages and divide its monetary value. Exodus 21:35. The use of the expression its monetary value and not the monetary value emphasizes that it is specifically the price of this ox that caused damage, classified as goring, whose money will be divided. In other words, the owner of the ox will be obligated to pay half the cost of the damage, but not half the price of another. In other words, not in other cases of damage caused by one's ox. The Gemara suggests a derivation from a different inference, and let one be held liable to pay only half the cost of the damage caused by eating and trampling, even if the incident took place on the property of the injured party. This can be inferred via a Kal V'chomer inference drawn from goring as follows. And if for damage classified as goring, which is governed by a stricter halacha, as one is held liable for damage classified as goring, even if it occurs in the public domain, yet one nevertheless pays only half the cost of the damage caused on the property of the injured party, then with regard to damage classified as eating and trampling, which are governed by more lenient halachos, as one is completely exempt from liability for damage caused in the public domain, is it not right that he should pay only half the cost of the damage caused on the property of the injured party? Amar kra yishalem tashlumim me'alya. The Gemara answers that the verse states with regard to eating and trampling, the best of his field and the best of his vineyard he shall pay. Exodus 22:4. The intent of the verse is to emphasize that the owner of the ox pays a proper, meaning complete amount of payment, and not half the cost of the damage. Velote keren b'rishus rabim chayav mikal v'chomer. The Gemara suggests a derivation from a different inference, and let one not be held liable at all with regard to damage classified as goring in the public domain. This can be inferred via an a fortiori inference as follows. And if for damage classified as eating and trampling, for which one is liable to pay the full cost of the damage for incidents that took place on the property of the injured party, one is completely exempt for damage caused in the public domain, then with regard to damage classified as goring, which is governed by more lenient halacha, as one is held liable for only half the cost of the damage caused on the property of the injured party, is it not right that one should be exempt in the public domain? Rabbi Yochanan Amar kra yechtzun. Ein chatzi nezek chaluk lo b'rishus harabim v'lo b'rishus hayachid. Rabbi Yochanan said the verse states in reference to an innocuous ox, and the carcass they shall also divide. Exodus 21:35, to indicate that there is no difference with regard to the payment of half the cost of the damage, whether the damage occurs in a public domain or whether it occurs on private property. V'yehei adam chayav b'kofer mikal v'chomer, u'ma shor she'eino chayav b'arba devarim chayav b'kofer adam shechayav b'arba devarim Eino din sheyeh chayav b'kofer. The Gemara suggests a derivation from a different difference. And let a person who has inadvertently killed another be liable to pay ransom. This can be inferred via kal v'chomer as follows. If the owner of the ox, who is not liable to pay 4 types of indemnity, nevertheless is liable to pay ransom, a person who is liable to pay the indemnity, isn't it not all the more so that he should pay ransom? The Gemara answers, the verse states with regard to an ox killing a person, Amar kra b'chol asher yushas alav. Alav v'lo aladam. The verse states with regard to an ox killing a person, he shall give the redemption of his life, whatever is imposed upon him. Exodus 21:30. Upon him, this means upon the owner of the ox who kills a person, but not upon a person who kills another person. The Gemara suggests the reverse derivation, and let the owner of an ox that injured a person be liable to pay the 4 types of indemnity. This can be inferred via a kal v'chomer as follows. And if a person who is not obligated to pay ransom, if he kills someone, is nevertheless liable to pay 4 types of indemnity, if he injures another, then with regard to the owner of an ox who is liable to pay ransom, is it not right that he should also be liable to pay the 4 types of indemnity? Amar kra ish b'miso v'lo shor b'miso. The Gemara answers, the verse states with regard to this matter, if a man maims another, Leviticus 24:19, from which it can be derived that this mission applies when a man harms another person, but not when an ox harms another person. Iboilahu, rego shedorsal agabi tinok b'chazar nizik mahu shitasham kover. A dilemma was raised before the sages with regard to trampling. In the case of an animal that tramples a child in the courtyard of the injured party and kills the child, what is the halakha with regard to the liability of the owner of the animal to pay ransom? The Gemara explains the different sides of the question. Do we say that this halakha is just as it is with regard to goring? Accordingly, just as with regard to goring, once an animal has gored 2 or 3 times, this becomes defined as its usual manner, and therefore it is deemed forewarned, and the owner must pay ransom in the event that it kills a person by an act classified as goring. Here too, it is not different. As with regard to the category of trampling, the owner is deemed forewarned from the start, and he must therefore pay ransom. O Dilma, Karen Kavanas Lahazik, Hi Ain Kavanas Lahazik. Or perhaps, should we say that the halakha with regard to goring is more stringent, as goring requires the animal's intent to cause damage, and that is why the owner must pay ransom in the event of a death. But in a case of trampling, where there is no intent to cause damage, the owner would be exempt from paying ransom. Tashima. The Gemara suggests coming here a solution to this dilemma from a Braita. If one brought his ox into a courtyard of a homeowner without his permission, and it gored the homeowner, and he died, the ox is killed by stoning, and the owner of the ox is obligated to pay the full amount of the ransom, regardless of whether the animal is innocuous or forewarned. This is the statement of Rabbi Tarfon. The Gemara proceeds to clarify, from where does Rabbi Tarfon derive that with regard to an innocuous ox, the owner must also pay the full amount of the ransom? Is it not because he holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who says that the owner of an innocuous ox that killed a person pays half the ransom if the incident took place in the public domain? And he derived this ruling via a kal v'chomer inference from the halachot of trampling. And if in the case of trampling, for which one is exempted entirely from liability when it occurs in the public domain, one must nevertheless pay the full ransom if the incident took place on the property of the injured party. With regard to goring, for which one must pay half the ransom when it occurs in the public domain, is it not right, all the more so, that one should be obligated to pay the ransom for an incident that took place on the property of the injured party? Evidently, it is clear that there is a ransom payment in the case of trampling. Amar of Simi min Nahar Da'a. Tana Mezikim Deregel Maisi Le. Rav Shimi of Narda said, It is possible to explain that the Tana derived his Kal V'chomer inference from damage caused by trampling, and if in a case of trampling for which one is completely exempt from liability when it happens in the public domain, one pays the full cost of the damage done on the property of the injured party with regard to goring, for which one must pay half the ransom payment if the ox kills a person in the public domain. Is it not right that one would certainly be obliged to pay the full ransom if the person was killed on his own property? According to this reasoning, there is no indication that one pays a ransom payment in the case of a child that was killed by trampling. V'lifroch, malin azikin deregel shekain yeshna be'esh mitamun. The Gemara asks, but if this is the basis for Rabbi Tarfon's opinion, let the Gemara refute it in this way. What can be learned about ransom from damage caused by trampling? These same halachot apply to fire. Nevertheless, there is no obligation to pay ransom when a person is killed by fire, as was stated explicitly in a Braita above. 10a. Consequently, the attempt to drive an a fortiori inference about ransom from trampling is obviously flawed. The Gemara answers the a fortiori, or the Kal V'chomer inference, can be based on the damage to concealed articles caused by trampling on the property of the injured party. One would be exempt for damage such as this if it were caused by fire. The Gemara responds to this challenge with a different one. What is notable about damage to concealed articles caused by trampling? It is notable in that these same halachot apply to the category of pit. But nevertheless, there is no ransom paid if a person is killed by a pit. Consequently, an attempt to derive an a fortiori inference about ransom from this halakha is obviously flawed. The Gemara answers the a fortiori inference can be based on damage caused to vessels by trampling on the property of the injured party. One would be exempt for damage of this nature if it were caused by a pit. Ma lekelim sheyeshin be'esh, bekelim tamunim, ma lekelim tamunim sheyeshin b'adam. The Gemara rejects this as well. What is notable about damage caused to vessels by trampling? It is notable in that these same halachot apply to the category of fire. The Gemara answers the Kal V'chomer inference can be based on damage caused to concealed vessels by trampling. In this case, one would be liable for trampling, but exempt from liability for both fire and pit. So this can be the basis for the ransom payment via the a fortiori inference stated by Rav Shimi of Narda. The Gemara rejects this as well. What is notable about the damage caused to concealed vessels by trampling? It is notable that these same halachot apply to the category of man, as a person is liable for damage to these items but does not pay ransom if he inadvertently kills another person. Rather, isn't it correct to conclude, Elalav Shmamina, rather, isn't it correct to conclude from it, Mikofer deregel ma'isile, alma ika kofer beregel, Shmamina. Rather, isn't it correct to include from it that since the halachot of the ransom payment with regard to goring cannot be deduced from the halachot of damages with regard to trampling, the Tana derived his a fortiori inference based on the halachot of ransom in the case of trampling, and therefore it may be concluded that apparently there is ransom for a case of trampling. The Gemara affirms, conclude from it, that this is so. Consequently, in the case of a child trampled to death by trampling, while on his parents' property, the owner of the animal must pay ransom. I believe that due to time, we'll stop at the bottom, right before the Mishnah. The words of Acha of Difti said to Ravina. Okay, stop here.